We're here with Britta Gross at the LA Auto Show, and Britta's with General Motors, and she's working on their initiatives to provide charging infrastructure for their electric vehicle, which is a range extended car, the Volt. So Britta, greetings, it's great to see you again.
Thank you, Bill.
Tell us about what you're doing now with respect to infrastructure for the Volt and similar kinds of cars.
All right, what you have to keep in mind is that this vehicle is it's the right vehicle, but a vehicle itself doesn't necessarily have everything figured out. And what's important is that we work on all the things around the vehicle. So how are you going to charge this vehicle? Now the beauty of this vehicle here, the Chevy Volt, is that you can plug it into any regular household electrical plug. But some people don't live in homes or don't have access to plugs in their carports or whatever. So obviously the first issue and first thing that we want to address is, what about all these early adopters that are out there but live in apartments or multifamily dwellings that just don't have access to electricity there? So public charging infrastructure, some semblance, some initial seeding of some public charging is really important. We're also looking for all the enablers that have to take place around the vehicle to make this thing more acceptable, lower cost to consumers. So I work on the areas of enablers and incentives with governments. What can government do? What can the federal government do? What can state governments do? Local governments? What can everyone do working together to bring to make this vehicle much more affordable, putting incentives on the vehicle? And maybe some of the incentives aren't just financial. Some of those are non-financial incentives, such as the very popular HOV lane access. Or what about helping us with home charger installation costs for consumers that want to upgrade to maybe 240 because they want a much quicker charge for the vehicle overnight? So those kinds of things, there's costs associated with it. We'd like to make sure that they're handled. I think the last sort of arm of infrastructure is communications. And that is, are we educating people right? Does everyone understand the benefit and value of this vehicle, that 40 miles you go on this vehicle before any drop of gas is spent on the vehicle? And so this understanding that you don't have to have a 40-mile commute to appreciate what this is. Even if you have a 70-mile commute to and from work, the first 40 miles are all electric, zero emission.
Okay, so where are you at in terms of, how did you start? Where do you go? Do you start in Washington, D.C.? I think you're in Florida now. Do you start with the government in Florida, Fort Lauderdale? And how do you, you're one person, and
yes,
what are your resources, and how do you do that?
So let me tell you how you set up an infrastructure program and start thinking about all the things that have to happen around the vehicle. One of the first things we realize is that the utilities are so different. And there are 3,000 utilities across the USA. It wasn't enough to work with one utility that may be completely driven by different regulatory environments, different ability to do incentives, different ability to put low-cost electricity rate structures in place, and what have you. So we set up a collaborative effort through EPRI with 30 electric utilities around North America. Now it's up to 40, a growing enterprise here. Utilities that want to be on board, very, very progressive utilities, helping us figure out what are the common standards for plugging in these vehicles, what are the common communication protocol standards for talking to a vehicle, making sure it charges off peak, a lot of those issues. How do we talk to the public in a common way so that we don't have two industries saying different things and prioritizing things differently? So we're commonizing the incentives that we're asking for, we're commonizing educational messaging, how important is V2G or not, those kinds of things. We're really trying to rally the utilities and General Motors together so that we are speaking with one voice and doing the right thing and being very, very successful when the vehicle deploys. Now you asked about then the deployment of this vehicle, how does that work? We are just now developing what is the distribution plan for this vehicle. We can't be in every dealership at the same time. So what we are now looking at is, how does this vehicle deploy? And in fact, what would be attractive for a city or region to offer to make it a lot easier to bring this vehicle to their market. So we've sort of listed and come up with a list of stakeholders that ought to be on a sort of a collaborative city effort or regional effort with the enablers that we want to see in place. It's a hefty amount of incentives, public charging, some home charging installation help, low electricity rates. I mean, everything you can think of that makes this vehicle slide right in and start to be appreciated and acceptable, even in a cost sense, to more and more consumers, that this really does indeed become what we want it to be, which is a large-scale, mass-produced vehicle.
Okay, so Is this fairly well a national effort, or do you see there are sort of regions of the country that are going to be more adaptable? The coasts, for example, as opposed to the Midlands of the country.
You know what, we haven't decided how this is going to be deployed. There are strengths in different regions, obviously. There are incentives in different, I mean, I can name off a few states and regions where there are just compelling incentives in place already, very, very proactive utilities and so on. If I think about the Carolinas and Florida, and I think about the California, of course, and the Northwest sector, Washington, Oregon, Texas has got some really strong efforts, and I don't want to leave out anyone in this thing, but there are some really deep pockets of best practices out there that we recognize, we appreciate, we want to continue to promote these kinds of plug-in ready cities and be ready for how we're going to deploy it. And we'll bring it to every market as quickly as we possibly can.
You're looking at a 2010, late 2010 launch date. Will we have the necessary infrastructure in place at that time, or does the car have to kind of get out there first and then the stakeholders say, oh, now we need to really get serious about building infrastructure?
I think that maybe when we talk about infrastructure, a lot of people think it's just about the public charging. And since it goes way beyond that to incentives, the incentives have to be in place in the beginning. Otherwise, this is not going to be affordable. It's not going to be as widely adopted and bought as we're thinking right now. So we do have to have quite a bit of these incentives in place. Now, the first fantastic step was the federal government putting $7,500 on the hood of every 40-mile achieving electric vehicle. That's a fantastic incentive. That's a start of what we're looking for. Now we need to bring that down to a state, local level, see what else we can do to bring down the initial cost of these vehicles. So yes, some of this has to be done. Does all of it have to be done? No. We don't have to have a complete public charging infrastructure, but it sure would be good to put sort of some semblance of public charging in place for all those early adopters that just don't have access to plugs at homes or in their carports.
So which is more important, the incentives or the infrastructure in your mind?
I think because this vehicle is so beautifully designed to be charged in any standard household outlet, I think that you have to say the incentives become the most important thing at this point, because it is so adaptable. Most people can find a place to charge in a vehicle, and if it's not at your house, it's at somebody else's house. And keep in mind what it costs to charge this vehicle. This vehicle is a 16 kilowatt hour battery, of which only 8 kilowatt hours is needed to charge the battery fully. We use about half of that capacity of the battery. So 8 kilowatt hours, if the US average electricity rate is about 10 cents, that's 80 cents for a full charge of that vehicle if you've drained the battery all the way down. So for 80 cents, I think we can find some places to plug in this vehicle pretty conveniently, even in public today.
Okay, good. Well, Britta, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Bill. Pleasure.
Appreciate it.